A while ago, a story appeared on Brightside that got quite a few people worked up, because it explained some aspects of Yellowstone National Park's geyser basins that aren't commonly known by tourists. The article was titled, "Yellowstone's Most Dangerous Geysers," and it included a section about what would happen if someone were to climb inside a geyser, like the famous Old Faithful, to get a closer look. According to the article, the person would encounter something called a pressure relief valve. Here it is, right here. It says, quote, "But when you find yourself too close to the source of the eruption and the boiling water, you won't have time to make a decision. You can only rely on Mother Nature's mercy." There are several pressure relief valves in the park that protect the geysers from excessive pressure buildup. In case one of these valves gets clogged, the water may spill out unexpectedly. Let's just say that wasn't correct. In fact, not only is it incorrect, but it could be potentially very dangerous if people visiting Yellowstone believed this to be true. So we're going to clear up some misconceptions and explain what you need to know in 2025. Let's dive in. First of all, let me say that climbing inside an active geyser at Yellowstone or any other national park is extremely dangerous and often illegal. That being said, there have been incidents where tourists have done this in the past. Back in 1985, a 23-year-old man named Lonnie J. Anderson climbed into the Jewel Geyser at Yellowstone, which is near Old Faithful. According to reports, he wanted to retrieve his hat after accidentally dropping it in the geyser. However, the boiling water caused third-degree burns on more than half of his body, and he died a few days later from his injuries. Now back to the video. So let's start off by saying that there are no pressure relief valves in the geysers themselves. Those do not exist. But the idea behind that statement makes sense. Let me explain. Many of Yellowstone's geysers are considered to be hydrothermal wonders, meaning they're powered by geothermal energy created by the heat from the Yellowstone caldera, also known as the Yellowstone Supervolcano. Basically, the heat from the magma chamber below the caldera heats the groundwater, which turns into steam and creates an enormous amount of pressure. That pressure then pushes the water up through the rocks until it reaches the surface, creating geysers, hot springs, and fumaroles. Think of it kind of like a pot of water boiling on the stove. As the water heats up, the pressure inside the pot increases. If the pressure gets too high, the safety valve will open and release some of the pressure to prevent the pot from exploding. Now replace the pot with a geyser, and instead of water heating up on a stove, you have magma heating up groundwater, and you pretty much have the basics of how Yellowstone's geysers work. But instead of having a safety valve built into the lid of the pot, nature has a different way of handling pressure relief, and it has to do with the shape of the geyser cone. Most of the cones are shaped kind of like an upside-down ice cream cone. You've got the small opening at the top, which is the vent, and then a wider opening at the bottom, where the water comes out. Now, if you were to take a cross-section of a cone and look at it from the side, you would see something that looks like this. See how the sides of the cone are slanted? Well, that angle is important. As the pressure builds up inside the geyser and the water starts shooting up toward the vent, the rising water creates an expanding bubble of sorts within the cone. The rising water causes the pressure to increase until it reaches a point where the increasing pressure combined with the weight of the water column becomes greater than the force pushing up from below. Once that happens, the water starts to flow out of the cone at the bottom of the geyser and down the sides, releasing the excess pressure and allowing more water to rise up and start the process over again. So the shape of the cone itself acts as a natural pressure relief valve, if you will. However, there is more to it than just the shape of the cone. Geysers also have what are called terraces, which are the ledges you see on the inside of many of the cones. The terraces themselves help to stabilize the geyser and prevent it from erupting violently. They do this by providing a surface for the water to flow over as it descends down the inside of the geyser cone. This helps to reduce the speed of the water and allows the pressure to be released more gradually. It's kind of like when you pour water out of a jug. If you pour it straight down, the water comes out in a thin stream. But if you pour it over the rim, the water comes out in a wider sheet, reducing the speed of the flow. Same thing with the terraces in a geyser. They basically act as a kind of shock absorber, helping to stabilize the geyser and prevent catastrophic eruptions. Yellowstone National Park has more than 10,000 documented geysers, with about 500 of them actively erupting. One of the most famous and well-studied geysers in the world is Old Faithful. It's located in the upper geyser basin and erupts approximately every 90 minutes, shooting water up to 185 feet in the air. Old Faithful has been monitored closely by scientists since the early 1900s, and it's one of the most predictable geysers in the park. Other famous geysers include the Grand Prismatic Spring, which is known for its beautiful rainbow colors, and the Steamboat Geyser, which is the tallest active geyser in North America. So now you know how the geysers work and how they relieve pressure. But what happens if a geyser does not erupt? Just like anything else in nature, geysers are subject to changes in their environment, and sometimes that can lead to problems. For example, if the temperature of the magma chamber below the caldera decreases, the groundwater won't be heated as much, and the pressure in the geysers may drop. That can cause a geyser that was previously erupting regularly to stop erupting altogether. This is known as a dormant geyser. In other cases, however, the problem may be something external to the geyser. For example, if there's an earthquake in the area, that could potentially block the water from reaching the heat source and cause the geyser to stop erupting. Also, remember those terraces I talked about earlier? Well, if those become clogged with sediment or algae, it can cause a buildup of pressure in the geyser. That can eventually lead to an eruption that is more forceful than normal. This brings us back to the original article. The reason why the article referred to pressure relief valves was to explain why sometimes you might see water bubbling up through the rocks around a geyser. Remember, geysers don't just shoot water straight up. Some of the water actually flows out of the cone at the bottom and down the sides. That water can sometimes make its way back to the surface near the base of the geyser, creating what appears to be a bubble of sorts. So that's what was meant by pressure relief valves. It's not that there's some kind of mechanism built into the geyser to release pressure, but rather it's just a visual observation of water flowing down the sides of the geyser cone. And while it may seem like a good idea to climb inside a geyser to get a closer look, please don't. Not only is it dangerous and illegal, but it's also harmful to the geysers themselves. People climbing inside geysers can damage the fragile ecosystem of the geyser basin. They can also alter the geyser's eruption patterns and even change the color of the water. Hopefully now you understand that there are no actual pressure relief valves in Yellowstone's geysers, and that climbing inside one could be extremely dangerous. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.